150 minutes, 2.5 hours. That's all the time that I have with my students in class each week. It's such a short amount of time that I've come to think of time in the classroom with students as a sacred time. Given that class time is sacred, I've been thinking a lot about how technology can be used outside of the class to enhance our experience inside the class. I've been working with two colleagues, Jeremy Bernholtz, professor and colleague, and Daniela Ratelny, an undergraduate senior majoring in information science, to develop and implement several ideas involving technology outside the classroom. Today, I'll talk about one idea we've implemented, which we call co-design. We use Twitter to allow students to help us design our lectures in near real time so the lectures can be customized to the students' specific questions and insights about the current topics in class. The central idea comes from recent research on the general likes and dislikes of the current generation of students, sometimes called the Net Generation. One of the Net Generation's strong preferences is the ability to customize their experience, be it buying a new car or taking a class. Rather than be a passive consumer or audience, they want to play some role in developing the product or the experience. Consider the difference between watching TV and interacting with the internet. The internet is a much more interactive experience, in which the user has more control over what's going on than watching TV. One way to give students a role in designing their classroom experience is to allow them to help create the lectures. We thought that if the students could send us information about their encounter with the readings, be it points that they found engaging, concepts that they would like elaborated on, or things that they just didn't understand, then we could try to incorporate their points right into our lectures. In the past, professors have done this over the years, adjusting the following year's class based on feedback from the previous year. For this to work for the Net Generation, though, we need to incorporate their feedback at just-in-time speed. So our main question was, how do we get feedback in time to get that feedback into the lecture that would be delivered the next day? At the time we were trying to develop co-design lectures, Twitter was just being introduced and receiving a lot of attention. Twitter seemed like the perfect vehicle. The whole point of Twitter is to convey information quickly in a lightweight manner. We thought that because the class should introduce students to new and important technologies, we could try to use Twitter to implement co-designed lectures. Here's how we did it. By 10 p.m. the night before each class, students were required to tweet about the reading for the next class. Tweets are only 140 characters, so they are very, very short. The instructions were relatively open. Students only had to tweet on some topic related to the reading. We set the Twitter system up so that we would receive all the tweets, as would everybody else in the class. And importantly, students would use their real names when tweeting. At 10 p.m. the night before class, the undergraduate TAs would create a tweet report by sorting through the 180 or so tweets and identifying any patterns or themes that they saw, such as a topic that was repeatedly mentioned or a concept that was often questioned. And they identified great tweets that either explained or demonstrated a topic well, got something really, really wrong, or was just funny. They would then send on all the tweets in their tweet report to the professor, me or Jeremy Bernholtz. The next morning, we would look over the tweet report from the TAs and integrate the themes from the report directly into the slides for our lecture. This is accomplished in two ways. First, we had a section within the lecture each day called Tweet Meet that was dedicated to going over the major themes and questions from the tweets. Tweet Meet lasted for about 10 minutes, and it started each time with a Wordle. A Wordle is a graphical summary of text that shows the most common words in a larger font. The bigger the font, the more often the word appeared in the tweets. It's a very quick and easy way to see what was mentioned most in the tweets, and importantly, what topics were not mentioned at all. We often found that these dark spots in the tweets, the topics in the class that students never mentioned, were the ones they were having the most difficulty with. We then used that information in the rest of the lecture to ensure that we zoomed in on that scary topic. The remainder of Tweet Meet was the themes and questions that came from the tweets. These often were hinted at by the Wordle, and you can see that some words were related to the topic of the class, in this case, how people collaborate with technology, that some things were mentioned much more often than others, and that some terms really didn't seem to fit the readings and suggested something interesting going on in that space. Here's an example of using the students' tweets to explain one of the topics from class in TweetMeet. This is a topic called the mere exposure effect, in which familiarity with a stimulus can lead to many interesting social effects. You can see that these tweets present the idea of mere exposure in the students' own words. And we can use their examples to help build their understanding of the different effects that come from mere exposure. You can also see that the students' usernames are in the tweets, their first initial plus their last name. We learned later that students were always very, very proud when their tweets made it up onto the screen. And we even discovered that students would take photos of their tweets when they made it onto the screen. The last part of the tweet meet was highlighting and answering questions raised in the tweets. Allowing the students to ask questions offline can allow more students to feel comfortable in asking questions. And because the questions are posed for the whole class, everyone benefits from the answer. The second way that we used tweets was integrating them throughout the rest of the lecture, often as a way of demonstrating or explaining concept. So tweets that were particularly good at highlighting a concept or provided a good example were integrated right into our slides. In this slide, you can see that the tweets are built right into each of the lecture points. Each tweet either provided an excellent question for discussion, like the first tweet, another way to put the key point, like the second tweet, or a good example, like the last tweet. Students later told us that they found these tweets very useful when studying for the exam. Not all tweets were good, of course. Tweets that were problematic, either because they were wrong or they missed a key point, were also included. We found problematic tweets to be particularly useful for the class and often tended to really focus the class's attention. To update an old saying, there's no such thing as a bad tweet. Finally, we would close the class with the funniest tweet of the day, something we called the Tweet of Zen. A side effect of customizing the lectures with the students' input is that the tweets were often humorous and engaging. They enlivened our lectures, and we wanted to recognize that with the Tweet of Zen. The feedback from the students so far about co-design has been overwhelmingly positive. We hope to continue investigating ways to allow our students to customize our lectures so they can feel some ownership over the lectures, which we hope will motivate deeper and more enthusiastic learning.